to again thank PIDS. I think this is a very important thing to do. I think we do need a lot of fora such as this, which is evidence-based and really analytical discussions that to guide our policies in this country. Second, my first comment on Dr. Canlas's paper is it's like reading a good book or watching a movie. It leaves you wanting for more. So I hope somebody asks him to write an extended version of this on his paper, or make it a trilogy so he can just continue to expand on it. When I'm looking at the panel in front of you, I realize I don't think I'm here to represent the academe, because you have much more esteemed academicians. I think I'm here wearing two hats. One as a member of Philippine Business for Education, which is a collection of business groups that are interested in seeing higher reforms in our education system, and so more of an advocate. And the second as a head of a profit-oriented higher education system in this country. So again, a view from the business sector. In which case, let me begin right away. That's my way of saying I do not have a prepared paper like the two previous speakers. So this might be a little bit more rambling than theirs. I think there is no question that we all agree that higher education is something that we need to pursue. But I think to pursue it in the right directions, I think there are two philosophical underpinnings that have run through our government, and through not just the government, but even in our sector, that we need to change. And this does not speak of any specific administration, I have to be careful, does not speak necessarily of this particular administration, but it is, having worked with government for some time, it actually has run through a lot of previous administrations. The first is, there's a strong, growing belief that, or it's been verbalized quite often, is that not everyone needs to go to college. I've heard this time and time and again, given by both government people and others, that say not everyone needs to go to college. In a world where most countries are trying to increase the number of students going to college, we seem to be trying to limit the people going to college. That we say, no, these people are just meant for tech folk, or these people don't need to pursue a higher education, or they're not ready for school. I think that's something we need to first accept, that the issue here is not, it's not government's decision about who should go to college or who shouldn't. It should actually be an option, a decision made by others, and the opportunity should be as given to as broad a sector as possible. The second philosophical underpinning is one that Sinch just talked about, which is, while most of us have probably been educated, well, although this is a predominant UP crowd, it's probably not that well. Historically, 80% of higher education has been provided by the private sector. There is another philosophical underpinning that private education is evil, and that all profit-oriented schools are bad. And education is a social good, therefore we should not try to seek to raise money from this. I agree with Sinch, being part of the sector, that there are people out there who couldn't care less about quality. But that's true of any other sector. You have some people who don't care about quality and only want to hit the bottom line and will exploit labor and will cheat on the environmental concerns. But you also have the good guys who are there who intend to provide proper, high product services. And so I think we need to change this thinking. Actually, in this country, while the rest of the world has reached out to the private sector to seek an expanding role for private higher education, private education in private sector in higher education, in this country, we see a diminishing role. As a matter of fact, greater challenges from state education. Again, I'm not one to defend private education. I agree with Sinch. I've seen those fire traps. I've seen those, what we call second floor schools, second floor on top of a drugstore schools where you walk through dark alleys. But I don't think this speaks of the, I won't mention any brand, I don't think this speaks of the entire sector. So I think these are two clear philosophical underpinnings that we need to change if you really are to progress. For number one, while not everyone needs to go to college, I think it's not government's decision of who should and who shouldn't. And second, that we should allow a lot stronger role for private higher education. Now going back to the other paper, I think I agree perfectly with Dr. Canlas's statements that one way to increase access really is to increase private funding, either through loans. And we're very, very happy with the Univast. But I think one of the issues is we need to look at this on a system-wide basis. And I was talking to Dr. Vic Paqueo about this. I don't think you can take one funding mechanism in isolation without trying to track all of the others. You know, we've been doing education reform. It's so easy to identify from the budget what is the national budget for basic education. It comes out as a single figure. When you try to look for higher education, it comes across many more budget items. So it's hard to really identify what is the total budget going to higher education. Because some goes to SUC, some goes to CHED, some goes to local universities, some go in the form of scholarships, etc. I think we need to look at the funding for education. Not just, we need to look at the state, how much goes to the SUCs, how it's budgeted, vis-a-vis the UniFast, vis-a-vis other forms of funding, in order to really create a more clear level playing field in education. So while I agree with the UniFast and everything, I don't think it can be taken in isolation. But we rather have to look at it on a wider systemic basis of all the kind of funding that goes into higher education and how this matters, how this affects access of the different sectors. Second is, let me go to the issue of quality. I will speak from an industry perspective. I will not use famous economists. I'll use someone less. I will use Michael Porter. Michael Porter, in competitive industries, should be a competitive industry is driven by a demanding customer. I think part of the problem with our higher education sector is we're really confused about who the customer is. On one hand, the customer, it does make sense for many of us that the customer is industry, because they're the ones who hire our graduates. The problem is, the customers of the school is not industry. The customer of the schools is parents, are the parents. What the parents want, that's what the schools give. And so we've been telling, even if the parents want a course which does not exist, where there are no jobs at the end of the runway, like for example when nursing was declining, schools will still offer nursing because that's who the clients of the school are. And I have to make a note, even the state universities offer nursing. And right now they're also offering HRM, and also accountancy. So the school's customer is the parent, and yet the ones who are most concerned about the quality of the output is industry. I think part of this is really to link all of these three sectors together. I think this is an important role if you want to drive quality. This is really strange. We're making a big effort, and Sinch mentioned this, to bring industry and academia together. But I know Dr. Alba is also heavily involved in that. And it's so funny because we just don't speak the same language. When you get CEOs together, the brightest people in the country, CEOs together with university presidents, once the university presidents start to talk, all the CEOs start to text. And once the CEOs start to talk, all the university presidents all take a break and go to the restroom. We just don't seem to be speaking the same language, yet we all want the same thing. And it's so funny because how do you say, the schools are demanding, we want more involvement from industry, but then they stop and say, but the involvement we want is we want you to donate laboratories, provide scholarships, don't touch our curriculum. But just give us the labs we need, right? And then industry is also demanding, we want to train your faculty, but we don't want to train them in our universities because we're so worried you might run away with confidential information. This will be here also often. And yet, all the studies in the world show that actually the industry higher education mismatch is really solved by the need for these two groups to work together and really start talking together. So I think a large portion of the discussion really has to go getting industry involved in the education system more and more. One of the ways PBED is pushing this is what we call industry accreditation or sectoral skills councils, where curricula is designed primarily not by one or two representatives on the technical panel of chair, but it's really driven by industry-defined competencies, where it's industry says, these are the competencies we expect of university graduates in certain fields. But then you ask, how do they enforce it? They can enforce it by industry-driven accreditation. Right now, most of our accreditation systems are driven by peer or fellow members of the academy, not by the ultimate customer of our graduates, which is industry. We're encouraging industry to get more involved in determining the level of quality in our schools. It's voluntary, if the school does not care about their students getting hired, that's up to the school, right? but what we're also encouraging industry to start advertising and saying where they get their graduates from. So I think this is something we need to consider when we move forward in quality higher education. I think it will only move forward is if we have a larger role for industry. And we need, believe it or not, I'm sure you believe it, we need to teach industry how to do this too, because they have no idea about how to get involved in schools. The last thing I think that we have to think about moving forward, this came up very interesting from the discussion I had last night with some members here, with Dr. King and Dr. Paqueo, is that the landscape of education is really changing. I think Sage talked about it a little bit in her discussion on lifelong learning, such that the role of institutions, the traditional higher education institutions, as we know of it, is diminishing. You now have industry-led, purely industry-driven certification. You have the whole idea of what they call micro-credentials, where you can get your credential, you can get a small competency in 2 weeks, go to work, come back, take another competency, until you finally build it up to a diploma where there's a recognition of prior learning, which can happen completely without going to school. This is the world where our students are now not stuck in one degree or one career, where they will most likely change careers 10 times in their lifetime. This is the world we're entering. And in such a world, I think we need to leapfrog our recommendations into that world, such that a lot of the institutions we have today really are kind of outdated and not ready for what's going to be happening. And I think as we move forward, we need to take this into consideration. Is there going to be government funding for different kinds of higher learning, which is not school-based, which is not institution-based? So we should move towards a more we should encourage and incentivize work-based training systems, where learning happens in the schools. 80% of your learning happens in companies or in the real world, while 20% happens in an institution. This is where the funding mechanism should consider also going into, rather than, it's a little bit funny that we're still considering very traditional scholarships and loan mechanisms, when right now, for example, Infosys has stopped hiring students from IIT, which is one of the top IT institutions in the world. Yet Infosys does not hire from them. They say their graduates don't meet our requirements. So Infosys started its own 12-week boot camp. Its own. If you work through that boot camp, more than 90% are hired by Infosys. If you work 12 weeks, why go through a 4-year degree? And we should think about these kind of systems and how we can encourage or possibly incentivize work in this direction. So I will end there. I'd like to basically say that this is why I'm encouraging Dr. Canlas to think about his sequel or an expanded version of his paper to take some of these other things into consideration. So thank you.